right, good morning, everybody. This morning, it's Tuesday, July 14th, and this is the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. So I will call the meeting to order, and I'd like to welcome everybody that's here. We do have the Office of the Auditor General with us again this week, and I'll just get everybody to we'll do the introduction as soon as we come up to section 3. So, as per every meeting, we always read out our mandate and the statement of purpose and value. So I'll begin with that. The mandate of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts is charged with matters concerning the public accounts of the province, the annual report of the Auditor General, and fiscal management. Our statement of purpose and values. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts is dedicated to improving public administration in partnership with the Auditor General. The committee examines the administration of government policy, not the merits of it. The committee strives to achieve consensus in its decisions whenever possible, and members take a nonpartisan approach to the work of the committee. So I'll ask for an adoption. Okay, Carla, for the adoption of the agenda. And so we'll move on to section 3, and as I noted, we've got the Office of the Auditor General with us. We have the Auditor General Darren Noonan, and they will be reviewing chapters on financial audits as well as government advertising and IT security access controls from the report from the Auditor General of 2020. So Darren, I'll hand it over to you, and thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to reviewing these chapters with you.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. With me today, I have Jerry Russell, again, our Senior Director, and Sherry Griffin, our Performance Audit Director. And joining us for the first time this year is Sarah Rogerson. She's our Director of Financial Audit. So I will get started. So financial audits. The financial audit section of the annual report provides summary financial highlights and comments on indicators of financial condition for the province. We report on observations and recommendations resulting from our annual audit of the consolidated financial statements. We perform an annual audit of a number of agencies, boards, trusts, and crown corporations. We provide a summary of issues reported in our management letters. We also examine the processes for recording current and capital appropriations, as well as the approvals, processing, and recording of special warrants, appropriation transfers, and sequestrations. We provide summary information and observations. Government is responsible for the management and control of public resources. The presentation of financial statements and other financial information is one way in which government demonstrates accountability to the public. Management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of financial statements, with oversight from those charged with governance. The auditor is independent of the financial preparation and reporting process. The work of an independent auditor provides assurance that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. The Audit Act requires the Auditor General to perform financial audits of the province's consolidated financial statements, Crown-controlled or owned corporations, and the trusts and funds held by any agency of government insofar as they are not subject to a financial audit by a separate external auditor. So the next sections we'll get into some of the indicators of the financial condition. In this chapter, we provide financial highlights and information on selected financial indicators based on the operating results and financial position of the province from 2014-15 to 2018-19. For the year ended March 31, 2019, the province reported a surplus of $57 million, the second reported surplus in a row. This is slightly down from the prior year surplus of $74.6 million. However, it is a significant improvement from the budgeted surplus of $1.5 million for 2018-19. Overall, revenues increased by $91.6 million compared to the prior year. Increased taxes and revenue from the Government of Canada were the main drivers of the increase for the year ended March 31, 2019. There was also increased revenue relating to Agriculture Insurance Corporation reinsurance recoveries. Total expenses increased by $109.2 million compared to the prior year, with the main increases noted in expenses of the Agricultural Insurance Corporation, Health PEI, the Department of Family and Human Resources, the Department of Education, Early Learning and Culture, the Public Schools Branch, and the Department of Communities, Land and Environment. Net debt decreased by $5.1 million during 2018 and totaled $2.12 billion as of March 31, 2019. Consistent with prior years, we continue to provide information on a number of selected indicators of financial condition. We provide indicators that help assess the province's sustainability, flexibility, and vulnerability. Based on comparisons to the prior year and the trend over 5 years, improvements were noted in several selected indicators of financial condition. The province's ratio of net debt to gross domestic product has declined since 2015. This indicates net debt is growing at a rate slower than the growth in the economy. The ratio of net debt to total revenue has declined since 2015, and this ratio is a measure of the future revenue which will be required to pay for past transactions. The province's net debt per capita decreased by $330 per island resident from the prior year. This indicates the population is growing at a faster rate than net debt. And PEI's own source revenue as a percentage of gross domestic product has declined. This ratio indicates the extent to which a government is taking money out of the local economy through taxation, fees, and other charges. The ratio of federal revenue to total revenue, however, grew during 2019 fiscal period, indicating the province is more vulnerable. Vulnerability is the degree to which a government depends on sources of funding outside its control or influence. There are a number of other indicators presented in this chapter which help to provide insight into government's ability to maintain its programs and services, the flexibility it has to respond to economic changes, and its vulnerability to external sources of funding. Ultimately, decisions on raising revenue and incurring expenses are government policy decisions. So next is the audit of the consolidated financial statements.
I'm just going to pause for 1 second there, Darren. So that brings us to the end of the chapter on indicators of financial condition. Finding it difficult to put my words together this morning. Does anybody have any questions on that section? No. Yeah, Robbie?
I'll see those numbers again sometime, whether we ever will, eh? No, we don't have mean way to say.
Anyone else? No? Okay, thank you, Darren. We'll continue on to chapter 10.
Okay. So the consolidated financial statements include the financial results of core government departments, the operating fund, with that of the various crown corporations, boards, and agencies controlled by government. The Controller's Office prepares the consolidated financial statements, as well as the working papers and other supporting documentation, which are then provided to our office for audit. Our audit was conducted in accordance with Canadian auditing standards. The 2018-19 consolidated financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the province's financial results. An independent auditor's report was issued on October 25th, 2019, and included a clean or unqualified audit opinion. The Auditor General's annual report detailed some of the more significant recommendations resulting from our audit of the consolidated financial statements. Our observations and recommendations related to transactions not measured in accordance with public sector accounting standards, areas where improvements are required in the consolidated financial statement note disclosures and schedules, and financial statement discussion and analysis, which should include more explanation and interpretation of financial results. These issues were discussed with government and we requested changes to the financial statements. In some cases, corrections were made, and the uncorrected changes did not affect our audit opinion on the consolidated financial statements. I would like to highlight two areas where the measurement of financial statement transactions were not in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. We noted other comprehensive income loss from government business enterprises was incorrectly recorded as part of the province's annual surplus in the draft consolidated financial statements provided for audit. This error did have a significant impact on the statements, schedules, and note disclosures, as well as the financial statement discussion and analysis. We provided an adjustment to the Controller's Office to correct the consolidated financial statements, and appropriate changes have been reflected in the final consolidated financial statements. We noted the Controller's Office does not have a process to analyze leases to ensure all leased tangible capital assets are accurately recorded. Public sector accounting standards require that leased capital assets be classified as assets and their related obligations as liabilities. We identified a leased property that met the necessary criteria, but an asset and liability was not recorded by the province. We estimated the fair market value of this property to be approximately $7 million and recommended that the asset and liability be recognized. However, an adjustment was not recorded. We had one recommendation, which is paragraph 10.6 on page 123 in the annual report.
Do we have any questions on that recommendation? So just quickly, Darren, when they were asked to make the correction, and I think you said it was not made, what was the reasoning for that?
Sarah?
Is that for the least tangible capital asset?
Yes.
Basically, they didn't have a process in place at that moment to identify all least tangible capital assets. So their response was that they were going to look into kind of setting up a process to identify others. We did ensure there were no other significant ones that we wanted to recommend, but they have committed to looking at it in the future to see if they can come up with a proper value for that one as far as others.
Okay, thank you. And did they give you a timeline in which they were going to, usually
I believe they were looking at it for this current fiscal year. That was, yeah, that's what their response was. They were going to try and look at it for this current fiscal year.
Okay. Any other questions? So I'll ask one more, and it is going back to the previous chapter, if you don't mind. And I just want to talk about timing on the AG report versus when the Blue Books come out. And so I know the Blue Books come out the end of October, and we're now in July, and we're reviewing those financial statements. So it's a significant time, and I recognize with COVID impacts, we would have actually been doing it in March, but it's still 6 months past when the Blue Books would have come out. How long does it usually take to get the AG portion, so the financial statement portion of the AG report completed after the Blue Books come out? Is that something that's done after the Blue Books are issued, or is this something that's already kind of compiled at the time of the Blue Books being issued?
I've never been through the process yet, but with the changes that were just made to the Audit Act in the current sitting, I'm hoping that as reports get completed, they get released.
Okay.
Historically, everything's kind of been put together for that March report, which, like I say, some of that's not very timely. And I think, one, this will help us get the information to you more timely, and also it'll allow our office to work more efficiently. Because right now, everything kind of builds to that one time, and it's a big panic to get the report done. Whereas, without having been there, I think once the audited statement is done, we should be able to put a report together relatively quickly.
Okay, that's encouraging. All right, thank you. Any questions, and we'll proceed? Okay, Sorry, thank you for letting me go back, and we'll go back to the next section.
Okay, so the consolidated financial statements contain a number of note disclosures and schedules which are an integral part of the financial statements. These notes and schedules provide information useful to clarify and explain items in the financial statements. For this information to be useful, it must be complete, accurate, clear, and understandable for the user. We noted areas for improvement in the financial statement note disclosures and schedules. Consistent with prior years, we noted incomplete information and errors in the schedule of contractual obligations and rights provided for audit. As a result of our audit work, we identified and recommended significant changes to note disclosures of approximately $118 million for contractual obligations and $76 million for contractual rights. Many of these related to contracts with the federal government, and the Controller's Office recorded the recommended changes. We also noted errors in the schedules to the consolidated financial statements. The cost of roads and bridges in the tangible capital asset schedules includes $609.8 million in assets for road resurfacing, which are fully amortized. It is likely that most resurfaced roads have been replaced over the years and should be removed. These assets should be reviewed to determine if they should be removed from the tangible capital asset schedule. Disclosures relating to pensions and other retirement benefit plans are lengthy and complex. The information presented is accurate, however, the excess detail and complex presentation make it difficult for the reader to completely understand. We also noted that supplementary financial information for government business enterprises was incomplete. We provided a recommendation relating to note disclosures and schedules in paragraph 10.2 on page 124.
Okay, in that recommendation, the Comptroller's Office should review the note disclosures and schedules in the consolidated financial statement to ensure the information included is complete, accurate, clearly presented. Is there any questions? I'm going to ask a question. We reviewed this report last year, and this exact same recommendation was in it. Right down to the roads and the amortization of roads. What explanation were you given from the comptroller as to why this has not been implemented? Because I believe it's been many years, consecutive years, that recommendation was made. So what reason were you given?
The Controller's Office indicated that they do agree with this recommendation, but it's a very complex recommendation to implement, so it's not a priority right now. So they didn't give us any kind of a timeline. Okay, and did they by chance give you at least like an action plan in which they would prioritize? No, we weren't given anything like that.
Okay, do you know how many years has this recommendation been in the audit report? I think I went back 4 years and it was at least in there that many times.
I don't know right off how many years actually, no.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Okay.
Financial statement discussion and analysis is prepared by management and accompanies the financial statements. Its main purpose is to expand on and explain information in the consolidated financial statements. The Canadian Public Sector Accounting Board provides guidance on the type of information to be provided in the financial statement discussion and analysis. We noted in Volume 1 of the Public Accounts provides limited information. There is very little interpretation and narrative explanations relating to the financial data presented. There are no explanations for budget to actual results and no explanations on variances from prior period. So we provided a recommendation in paragraph 10.24 on page 125.
Okay, and that recommendation 10.24 is the Comptroller's Office should improve the financial statement discussion and analysis to provide more useful, relevant information to users of the consolidated financial statements. Any questions on that? So last year, after reviewing this, we did discuss this recommendation with the Comptroller, and I think that there is an outstanding decision on that, Ryan, that we probably should discuss with the committee. It had to do with the budget being added into the audited financial. So that, and I think that's what you're looking for, right? Is the budget column for the GBEs to be added so that it's the same as the rest of the public accounts. Am I right in thinking that? It's the, no? Is that a different one?
No, that's actually something separate. That is a
Oh,
separate
okay.
recommendation we've been making.
Yeah.
Because the budget for the GBEs, and we'll come to it later, so I'm jumping ahead, but it is correctly presented in the financial statements. This has to do with the management discussion and analysis that is presented at the beginning of the consolidated financial statements, and it's prepared by management. And it just provides some further explanation on what's happening in the financial statements. So we think it could use some more detail to be more valuable to the users of the financial statements.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me. Okay, any other questions on that recommendation? Okay.
Canadian public sector accounting standards require original budget information to be presented in the province's consolidated financial statements. For several years, we've noted the estimates of revenue and expenditures is not presented on the same basis as the consolidated financial statements. A separate reconciliation was necessary in the schedule to the consolidated financial statements to enable users to compare actual results to planned results for the fiscal year. In addition, the operating budgets for government business enterprises who had revenues of $197.1 million and expenses of $132.1 million for the year ended March 31, 2019 are not publicly available. They are also not disclosed to the legislature. Detailed budget information of government business enterprises would enhance accountability and transparency. We provided a recommendation in paragraph 10.29 on page 126.
All right, and 10.29 budget documents should be presented on the same basis as the consolidated financial statements. Did the members have any questions on that one? So this was the one I was referring to, and what this would allow is, it's not disclosed right now, and I think it's just the accountability component of this is having your estimates to compare to actuals so that you can actually see if they are running on plan, and that provides more transparency. And am I correct in understanding that given how much of the revenues go into the public purse in order to help us deliver services and that kind of thing, understanding if they're running on plan is actually a benefit to the public?
Certainly.
And were you given any indication as to why, because again, this is another one that I went back year over year, this one's been recommended numerous years. Any feedback as to why this one hasn't been implemented?
The recommendation on this one actually goes to the Assistant Secretary to the Treasury Board. So our current year recommendation, we haven't received a response to yet, so I can't comment on that. And the response that we received for the year before, because it was recommended, it was kind of vague. Like, it didn't come right out and say why they weren't implementing it.
Okay. Any questions there? Okay. We'll continue. Thank you.
Section 16 of the Audit Act includes other reporting requirements that we've included in this chapter of our annual report. Under this section, the Auditor General is required to report the total amount of any claims, debts, or monies due to the province that have been discharged, cancelled, and/or released under Section 26 of the Financial Administration Act. Exhibit 10.1 includes both the amounts cancelled or discharged under Section 26, as well as amounts written off under Section 26.11. Section 16 of the Audit Act also requires the Auditor General to include information in the annual report on surpluses, deficits of agencies, boards, and Crown corporations, which is included in Exhibit 10.2.
Okay, and that's the end of Chapter 10. Sorry, does anybody have any questions on it? And shall we proceed to Chapter 11? Okay, thank you.
Chapter 11 summarizes the issues reported in our management letters as a result of the financial statement audits completed by our office. We issued management letters for the majority of financial statement audits completed. Issues identified during our audits and reported to management can be summarized into three main areas: accounting concerns, compliance issues, and internal control weaknesses. Some issues have been noted for a number of years in our management letters. A few examples of these repetitive issues are presented. However, details and recommendations are not included, as these are separately reported in the management letters that have been issued. We follow up on the implementation of these recommendations in each subsequent financial audit.
Sorry. All right, does anybody have questions on that chapter? That was Chapter 11. If not, we'll move on to appropriations and special warrants.
So this chapter provides comments and recommendations resulting from the audit of the province's appropriations and special warrants for the year ended March 31, 2019. Government spending authority is provided by members of the Legislative Assembly through an Appropriation Act. Special warrants are used when the Legislative Assembly is not in session and funds are needed for operations in addition to amounts that were included in the Appropriation Act. For the year ended March 31, 2019, special warrants totaling $37.7 million were issued. Special warrants provided an additional $35.5 million in authorized spending for current expenditures and $2.2 million for capital expenditures. These special warrants were partially offset by a $22.9 million increase in revenue for a net increase in spending authority of $14.8 million. The Audit Act requires the Auditor General to provide details on appropriations made by special warrant and the purpose of such appropriations. This information is included in Appendix B of Chapter 12.
Sorry, did you say Appendix B of Chapter 12?
Appendix B to Chapter 12.
Oh.
Is it correct?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't flip far enough, so, okay. All right, so the recommendation there is in accordance with the Financial Administration Act, special warrants should be obtained prior to expenditures being incurred. Did the members have any questions on that section? Okay, so we'll continue on.
The Financial Administration Act prohibits expenditures from being incurred unless provided for by an appropriation. When it is expected that an appropriation will be exceeded, a special warrant should be obtained prior to the expenditure being incurred. Consistent with prior years, expenditures were incurred at March 31, 2019 without a special warrant as required by the Financial Administration Act. There were 6 instances, the most significant of which relates to the Department of Education, Early Learning and Culture. And we provided the one recommendation, which I believe Michelle just
I jumped ahead. All right, so questions on this? And I recognize, members, I have not been asking how we want to deal with the recommendations as we've proceeded through. So we did miss a couple of chapters where we didn't make decisions on how we wanted to proceed. So this is also a recommendation that has been added to the report for numerous years. How does the members want to handle this recommendation? And I will cover the other ones that we've already gone through. Any suggestions, Rob?
Do we know what the special warrant was actually for? I mean, we know what department, but what was the justification with?
Yeah, we know what it's for, so that's in Appendix B. But I think it also comes down to, regardless of what it's for, there's still a process in place in order to do a special warrant. So I guess regardless of the spending level, regardless of the item or which department or anything, it's still required based on the Financial Administration Act. So any thoughts on that? If I could suggest we send a letter, because this would have to go through Executive Council. So if we could send a letter to Executive Council outlining the requirement and when an appropriations and special warrants are required and what the process is, in just as a on behalf of the public accounts, and that we recommend, we agree with the recommendation of the Auditor General. What does the committee think of that?
Sure.
Okay, Rob said sure. Anybody else? Okay, so the agreement of the committee then is to send a letter to Executive Council. If we could go back briefly back to Chapter 10, and I'm sorry, I apologize to the committee for not doing this at the time, but there was 4 recommendations made, and those were all to the comptroller based on the audit of the consolidated financial statements. So we should make a decision on how we want to address those. I believe, Clerk, I think we sent a letter to them last year regarding some of these recommendations that were also in the 2019 report, and I think we sent that to the comptroller. We probably have to go back in our records, but if the committee, how does the committee want to proceed with following up on these recommendations? Carla?
Excuse me, I like the idea of sending them a letter asking about their process, because if this is something that has been going on, as identified for the last several reports, then what are they following and what is their process? So I think that that's an important part of understanding why the recommendations haven't been implemented yet. So.
Yep, agreed. And I would have to go back into Hansard, I think, and review when we met with the comptroller, because we did have that discussion with the comptroller at the time. And I think where that, sorry, the rafters were just rattling there for a second. At that time, I believe that there might have been a disagreement on that particular, especially the final one on 10.29 about the budget document should be presented in the same basis of the consolidated financials. So I was just wondering if we could go back on our decision and see what progress we had made on this chapter out of 2019. And I believe that we had further discussions to have with the Office of the Auditor General and the Comptroller to get clarity. So I would ask the committee if we would be in agreement to summarize where we were on that follow-up, so that we go ahead, Sydney.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, because you're right. At the time, the comptroller disagreed.
Yeah.
I think it was more than just having to, or not being able to go forward with it. At that time, I think they just simply didn't want to account for, and it was specifically with the capital assets and the roads and stuff like that. So at least so it's on the record as showing that, you know, the Public Accounts Committee is following up, but to have that explanation on the record in a response to us, if it's going to keep coming up year after year, if it's simply a disagreement between the Comptroller and the Auditor General's office.
Right. I agree. And Clerk?
You're talking about the recommendation on budget presentation for government business enterprises?
I'm going from recollection, actually, and I didn't bring my notes with me, but I believe it's also, as Sydney mentioned, it's not just that one, but it's also the amortization. So 10.20 was another one that was an issue. And and it's the amortization of already amortized assets. That was also another disagreement. And I would like to go back and review where we were, but I think where we had ended up, and I think the committee should make a decision now, understanding that the Comptroller disagreed with the Auditor General's recommendation. I think at this point in time, it's probably a conversation where we bring all parties, everybody into a room together and discuss what the AG is looking for, and then what the issues are on the other side, and find out how can we come to the middle and have a resolution. Would the committee be in agreement with that? Corey?
Didn't they already present to us on that? Was it Gordon? Was he not in over in the J. Angus?
That's right. So Gordon McFadden did come in, and that was on the 2019 report. So, and where they had disagreed with this particular recommendation for the Auditor General, but we had never had a conversation with all parties at the table to discuss why and how can we come to a resolution then. Because to be honest, if they're not going to change and the AG continuously recommends, how do we come up with a resolution?
I guess I'm just, is that her job? Like, to bring everyone in the same room and say, duke it out?
Well,
The purpose of the recommendation is to just make the information more useful for the readers, so that's all we're trying to do, is provide as much information so that the average person can understand, because a lot of people aren't comfortable with reading the financial statement, especially the public accounts. It's pretty detailed. So the easier we can make it, the better for everyone involved.
and so to answer, well, I don't know if I have the answer for you, Corey. It's up to the committee to decide if that's our job or not. But if we're working in partnership with the Auditor General, and if we agree that that information should be available, and that that transparency, that level of transparency should be there, if that's the agreement from the committee, then I think, yeah, it is our position to ensure that the Auditor General's recommendation gets implemented. But I would put that out to the committee. Do we agree with this Auditor General recommendation? And if we do, then it is up to us to ensure that it gets done. So thoughts? Robbie?
You know, my opinion is that it is our responsibility to try to use what democratic tools that we have to encourage an agreement.
Yeah.
So, I don't see it beyond it. It's still a matter of, otherwise, what's the point? If they're making recommendations, if we don't have anything teeth to make them, anybody comply, then we're just sitting here listening for information purposes, and that's great, but I don't know what authority if we make the decision, you're doing that, do we have the ability to enforce that? I don't know that answer. I'm assuming we don't. So, because it's ultimately the will of the people then to decide whether that government is complying with, what's open and transparent.
If I could. Yeah, I think if the committee did want to bring all parties together, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, especially I'm a new Auditor General, Judy Killam's a new Controller. Sometimes people see things differently, and maybe we can come to a compromise, if you want to call it that.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
I would just like to clarify one thing that I mentioned earlier. The recommendation in paragraph 10.29, which has to do with the budget presentation, while it's in the chapter on the consolidated financial statements, the recommendation actually goes to the Assistant Secretary to Treasury Board. It does not go to the Controller. So that's the only thing I want to clarify in terms of bringing the Controller in. That particular recommendation would not be implemented by the Controller. It impacts the consolidated financial statements. That's why we have it in that chapter, but I just thought I should clarify that.
Okay. Clerk, Ryan?
And just on that note, the committee did, after meeting with the former comptroller and the new comptroller last November, the committee asked for a written explanation for that particular recommendation on budget presentation. The comptroller wrote back and explained that their verbal explanation in the meeting was as it stood, and so they asked that the further direction be sought from the Deputy Minister of Finance. The Deputy Minister did respond to the committee on May 20th in a letter about that, which is the letter the committee has, if you want to refer to that. Or I can refer to it here if you agree.
Would you mind, Ryan, referring to that and what the response was?
So this is a letter of May 26th from Deputy Minister Dan Campbell regarding recommendation 8.33 of the 2019 report of the Auditor General. And the committee requested written clarification on why recommendation 8.33 from the 2019 report of the Auditor General, budget should be presented on the same basis as the consolidated financial statements, cannot or will not be implemented. As you're aware, the province of Prince Edward Island relies on the Financial Administration Act to guide the development of the budget. Government business enterprises are overseen by boards and ultimately accountable to a minister or through a minister to the Legislative Assembly. The board and minister must approve a GBE's annual budget, and its net consolidated surpluses or deficits are included in the grant of supply considered in the legislature. Detailed financial results are disclosed through public accounts and through its audited financial information. This manner of presentation is in keeping with international financial reporting standards, the accounting standards to which GBEs are bound, and has met or exceeded what is provided in the budget books of many Canadian jurisdictions. This being noted, we take the advice of the Auditor General very seriously, even in those rare instances where we do not immediately or fully implement a recommendation stemming from the report. It is very carefully deliberated and researched to determine how we might do so over time. That holds true for this particular recommendation, which has been the subject of past reports. As a result of detailed discussions between the Auditor General's office and ours, revenues and expenses of some consolidated entities are now presented in the budget on a line-by-line basis, and there is a summary of total revenues and expenses for the remaining entities. The Auditor General noted this significant progress in the 2019 edition of her report.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ryan. Any comments or questions? So how would the committee like to proceed?
To write a letter with that controller, just to sort of suggest that it's been identified in the Auditor General's report, and as a legislative committee and public accounts, we would like to get an explanation on timelines and when that will be implemented.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? So I would add to that, Rob, in that, I mean, we've had a response, and I think in respect, like with respect to the Deputy Minister, I think it would be beneficial to have us all in the same room in order to have the discussion around this, just to see where we could come up with a compromise, and so maybe take it one step further than the letter. And I'm just wondering what everybody would think of that, just to have that open conversation around this to see. And I think what it comes down to is we don't, as public accounts, have any say over the budget line item, and that's not where the discussion is. I think it's just, like when I had talked to Jane about it, it's kind of just around transparency. And if you have the information all in one place, then somebody can actually see where we are to plan. And when you do look at some of the like the GBEs that we're, some of the GBEs that we're talking about, like their revenues, their surpluses are in the $20 million range, which is a lot of public funds that we're talking about. So anyway, I'd like to get a decision, whether it's a letter, another letter, or if it's an in-person meeting at some point in time to talk through it and find a happy medium. Then I would take that advice from the committee and as a decision. Carla?
Personally, I think rather than writing letters back and forth, if it's a matter of kind of coming together and finding a compromise or the best way forward, I think that letters just makes it a whole lot more complicated. And sometimes sitting face to face with someone and hearing what they have to say rather than reading it might be really helpful.
Okay. Rob?
I was going to say somewhat similar, but to say maybe in the letter you state that you know, if there's not a valid reason to why this couldn't be complied with, we will be looking forward to have a meeting and discuss it further. I mean, just to give them some option. But I don't have a problem at all with them coming in and having a discussion with everybody. But if it could be addressed with the letter, then that solves the problem. But.
Okay, Corey?
I guess I'm just confused of how this would work, and I don't know.
Just one second, Corey, your mic's not on. Oh, it is? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
And I don't know, clerk, maybe, is that like a normal practice to bring the Auditor General's office in and who they audited to sit down and, I agree with the recommendation, that's not, I just don't quite understand what, I don't know if this has happened in the past or not.
To my knowledge, no, it hasn't occurred here where the Auditor General and an auditee were before the committee at the same time, but in other jurisdictions for performance audits, sometimes.
I thought we'd have our first debate between the AG office and the finance department, but anyway.
Just in other jurisdictions, I believe that sometimes when an auditee is in, particularly about performance audits as opposed to financial audits, sometimes there is a representative of the Auditor General's office there to assist the committee in terms of if they have questions about the audit. But I'm not aware of past instances of the Comptroller and the Auditor General both present before the committee to discuss the recommendations.
Okay. Good. Carla?
I guess where I go to is, I don't know what the right answer is, but are we going to be reading the same recommendation in 40 years' time, you know? And so perhaps it starts with a letter that just said, you know, I kind of like what you said, Rob, like kind of to say, we need to find this, you know, this has been going on for this long. Is there some sort of give or, and then see what they say to that and then find the way forward?
What if
we're trailblazing?
What if we approach the controller's office and just have a meeting and give them our perspective and they can give us their perspective and then we'll report back to you?
Okay.
Keep it a little less formal than it needs to be.
Okay. Corey?
And I think that's kind of what I was kind of going to get to, is that it's up to that, like between the department and the AG's office, and you know, we can ask that it be, you know, that you should follow this recommendation, but at the end of the day we can't make them. And you know, maybe it's something they will change, or maybe, I don't know, maybe they never will, I don't know, but we can't force them to. And how long do we spend on one recommendation when we have, you know, we have a lot more stuff on the agenda to get to? That's just kind of where I think Rob's idea is send the letter and, you know, be a little more stringent in it perhaps, and the AG's office can meet with them, and you know, that's pretty well, that's about all we can do.
Okay. Any other? So am I hearing the decisions, send a letter with the expectation that the comptroller and the Auditor General work to find resolution for this recommendation? Everybody in agreement with that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. That's what we will do. Okay. So next is Chapter 3, I believe. Is that what you have?
Chapter 5, I believe.
Chapter 5, okay.
It's just a brief item, but the Government Advertising Standards Act came into effect on January 1, 2020, and requires the Auditor General to examine, when requested under the Act, certain government advertisements to determine whether the legislated standards for government advertising are met and that advertisements are not partisan in nature. The Act requires the Auditor General to report annually to the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly. This is the first report to the Legislative Assembly on the new responsibilities of the Auditor General under the Act. So for the period January 1, 2020 to March 10, 2020, which is the date of the annual report, the Auditor General's office did not receive any requests under the Government Advertising Standards Act.
Okay, great. Any questions on that? Okay, short and sweet. And so then we move on to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is IT security access controls. And the committee agreed last week that we would review the recommendations and then for a period go in camera for the details of the report based on the sensitivity that's included in the chapter. So you can go ahead.
So just to provide some background, the Prince Edward Island government collects, processes, and stores personal and sensitive information such as health and financial information. The Department of Social Development and Housing uses sensitive and confidential information to deliver programs to islanders. The Secretary to Treasury Board is responsible for the governance and administration of information technology within the Government of Prince Edward Island. The strategic direction of IT in government, and IT policies and standards development, maintenance, and adherence. In 2017, the Government Information Security Policy was approved by the Secretary to Treasury Board. It is a large 144-page document with 11 chapters. The GISP provides the framework for government organizations to establish policies and procedures necessary for the protection of government information assets. The policy includes a chapter on access controls, which is where we focused our work for this audit. So the Government Information Security Policy, or GISP, the purpose is to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets in the province's care. It outlines minimum security requirements for both information owners and information custodians. Information owners have the responsibility and decision-making authority for information through its life cycle. The Department of Social Development and Housing is the information owner of the data they use to administer its programs, as they have the responsibility and decision-making authority for information through its life cycle. The responsibilities of an information custodian are shared between the department and ITSS, as both have responsibilities related to maintaining and administering information assets, including managing and maintaining security and security infrastructure of information assets. The Department of Social Development and Housing delivers many programs, including as a social assistance program, child protection, and the accessibility support program. The information the department collects, maintains, and uses to administer these programs is often sensitive and highly confidential. Information Technology Shared Services, or ITSS, provides and manages security for the information assets through its life cycle, maintains and operates the technical infrastructure that information and information systems reside on, and maintains and operates the security infrastructure protecting information and information systems. Our audit objective was to determine whether the Department of Social Development and Housing and Information Technology Shared Services have designed and implemented key access controls as identified in the Access Control chapter of the PEI Government Information Security Policy. Our audit did not look for incidents of unauthorized access to security systems or security breaches. The public report does not include the specific areas of non-compliance with access control policies we found during our audit. This decision was made as the disclosure of areas of non-compliance could put government IT systems at risk. We provided detailed findings and recommendations on IT security access controls to the Secretary to Treasury Board, the Department of Social Development and Housing, and the Department of Finance. We reviewed selected policy requirements included in the GISP related to access controls. Overall, our audit noted there was a lack of compliance with several access control policies. Government was not regularly assessing compliance with security policies and standards, and government of IT security policy requirements needs improvement. The Government Information Security Policy has requirements for regularly assessing compliance with security policies and standards. Management must ensure security policies and processes are implemented in the areas of responsibility and facilitate regular reviews to ensure compliance with policy. In addition, information systems must be regularly checked for compliance with security policies and standards. We asked ITSS if they conduct reviews to assess compliance. We were advised that regular reviews were not conducted. Regular reviews of compliance would help to ensure access control policies are adhered to and identify areas of improvement. The GISP is a large, comprehensive document with a number of security requirements and is available to all government employees. It is not clear how the policy requirements were explained or communicated to ITSS staff, administrators, departments, and other government entities. Improved communication on policy requirements would assist in improving compliance with the policy. ITSS should develop a strategy to communicate security requirements of the access control policy to all key stakeholders. ITSS should establish a security compliance process to ensure implementation of controls to effectively protect information systems and assets. The issues we identified were based on selected information systems used by one government department. Similar issues may exist in other departments or entities. Government should use our audit recommendations to assess and, where necessary, improve IT security access controls in other departments and entities.
Okay. So we have 2 recommendations. Does anybody have any questions at this time? Okay, so at this time, as the committee agreed to go in camera, we'll go in camera for a few minutes to discuss the more details around the audit, and we'll be back in a second. Yeah.